All right, we're going to start welcoming folks back to the room. Hope you enjoyed the movie. So as we welcome folks back into the room, we hope you enjoyed the film. Before we get started, I just want to remind our participants that if you do have questions for Rodney, you can add them to the chat. And we have someone that is going to be monitoring that, so we'll be able to track those as we're going along in our conversation. So we'll just wait. Rodney, are you there? Not
I
seeing.
am. I'm getting a message though that I can't start my video because the
Oh,
host has stopped it.
okay. Let's see. Antoine, can you help us out on that?
Yes, give me a second here. Let's see.
Oh, wait, I think.
How about now, Rodney? There we
Perfect.
go.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, Rodney, I think we'll say welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here this evening. I've been a longtime fan of the AARP, and I know the AARP is always doing everything it can to help, especially retired and older persons. And so I'm very happy to have had this invitation and very happy to have a conversation with you.
Great. Well, we're delighted, and especially as we think about beginning the month. And, I think for me in particular, it was interesting to take a look at the movie because I remember that time. I think we spoke earlier that I grew up in the Midwest, and I remember the national attention around that. And, it was interesting. Watching the story as it played out in the documentary and seeing it shared, I had this question about in that moment when you were in the classroom instructing your students on the patches that were used in the concentration camp. Did you know in that moment that you were going to make that reference to the pink patch as something that was something that you would have been made to wear at that time, or had you thought about it, or was it kind of more spontaneous? That was something I was wondering while watching it.
I went into that classroom knowing that was a possibility, that it was an opportunity to organically make this information known. At that point, I was out to myself fully, to friends and family fully, but not yet on the job, certainly not yet with students. And I knew that could be the right moment to take that next step, and that it would be an appropriate moment to do so. And it would sort of be organic and natural and free flowing. And then from that point, I would move forward. But I didn't know I would actually take advantage of that opportunity until I did so.
Mhm. And I know appreciate how one of the students said that there was kind of like this a little bit of a pause and kind of I think, wait, what did he just say? Which I have to love about somebody that age who are like, oh, okay, just kind of moved on. What was it like for you as you saw students react, or, kind of what happened over the course of, I don't even know, the next till you wrapped up that session?
Well, at that point, the school year was already 7 or 8 months in, because we would start right around early September with Labor Day. This was mid-March. So I knew these students very well. I always had a good rapport with students. There would be a few who might cause a little aggravation here and there naturally, because I was working with 14 to 17-year-olds. But generally, the rapport and the relationship with the students was very good. I respected them. and their place and where they were, and they respected me. So this was new information for them. I suppose at this point, none of them had an idea or an expectation that this information would be out there. We have to always remember this is 1994. So I didn't have a Facebook page. I didn't have a Twitter page. We didn't have social media. These days, because of social media, so much about who we are, so much about our personal lives is so easy to find. It's just right there. In 1994, you had the possibility to keep secret what you needed to keep secret or what you wanted to keep secret. So this idea had not yet, for the most part, I suspect, crossed their minds. And while we were having national conversations at the time about this issue, Clinton took office in January of 93, and we spent most of 1993 debating, quote, gays in the military, ended up with the don't ask, don't tell policy. So we were having a lot of conversations around this issue, but still for my students, I would say 98% of them did not know an LGBTQ person, didn't have an individual who was openly LGBTQ in their lives. So I think it was a bit surprising for them, but overwhelmingly, young people are resilient, and overwhelmingly, I think most young people have a sense of justice and rightness, and they want things to be fair. And so overwhelmingly, I was accepted by most students. They wanted me to continue as their teacher in that classroom and in that school.
One of the things I, hearing you say that as well too, I think that I just had profound appreciation for you taking that leap. And so I wondered about the detractors. I mean, there was reference to one of the students, or I think it was one of the students talking about the notes that would be slipped underneath the door. And I'm sure there was a lot more than that. So I'm, kind of wondering, how difficult was it? I mean, was there ever a time where you wish you had done something differently? Or I don't know.
I can't imagine anything I would do differently if I had the chance. There was some opposition. You saw some of it in that video at the school board meeting in August of 1994. I did have, I remember particularly a passage from the Bible, Romans chapter 1, slipped under my door to my classroom. And oddly and ironically, it was in German. And it was that passage that's called a clobber verse, where St. Paul talks quite negatively about what we might perceive to be homosexuality. Once I was coming out of a restaurant a few blocks from the school, and some car went by and someone yelled FAG out the window of the car. So there were some experiences like that. But I think when you're young, I was 29 at the time. This was 29 years ago. I think when you're young, you're resilient, and these things sort of just rolled off my back, especially in light of the fact that I had a lot of support that would far, far outweigh the detractors.
Well, and speaking of that, I mean, one of the things that came out in the documentary was the story about your father. And gosh, how heartwarming and interesting to hear how he would sit in the parking lot to make sure that you got safely in your car. Did it surprise you when you learned that?
It did. I had no idea. I didn't have any idea either that was my last conversation with my father. He died in December of 2004. So I'm so glad he told me, because if he hadn't told me in that conversation, I would not have known. I don't think anyone else knew what he had done. He didn't tell me at the time because, one, I would have said, Dad, that's not necessary. Don't do that. Please, I'm fine. So I think that's the reason he didn't tell me. And two, I don't think he wanted me to know that he was that worried. My dad was born in 1944. It was an entirely different generation. I was born in 65, 21 years, a lot had happened. So my dad was still thinking that I was being perceived the way perhaps I would have been perceived in 1954 or 1964, and this was 1994. So I never felt afraid. I had a windshield or a side window bashed in my auto. It's never happened in my life. It happened when all of this was going on. Perhaps it was related to that, but I just didn't feel fear or anxiety. I just kept moving forward because I believed so strongly that what I had done was what was required of me, what had to happen, and that it was very good for everyone in that district, LGBTQ plus and non-LGBTQ plus. It was good for education.
I want to take a moment to see, we have Antoine Cook, one of my colleagues, watching our chat. Antoine, what questions are you seeing there right now?
Right now, there is a question in the chat, but I think it may have taken place in California. But the question is, did you include a discussion of the No on Six campaign in your classroom curriculum?
I don't remember if we did or not. That's a long time ago, and I don't remember precisely what I would have talked about, but I certainly gave students an opportunity always to be aware of what was happening in the present day, to have conversations, particularly in the intro government course, and then also to reflect back on controversies and conversations we'd had in the past, as you saw reflected in that poster project. But I can't remember specifically if we talked about that.
Well,
That's all we have thus far, though. Sorry.
oh, is that it for right now?
Yep, for right now.
Okay, thank you. So, one of the things I'm wondering about, Rodney, is that, thinking about if we were now, if that moment was now, and there's a lot of divisiveness that's happening in our country. We've had school shootings that are unfortunately almost commonplace. We talk about the frequency of which they're happening. I wonder, do you think it would have been different? I mean, do you think you would have felt different about of if that had been now?
I think teachers going into the classroom in the fall of 2023, the K-12 classroom, in many of our states are feeling anxiety and trepidation around these issues. We had 500 plus pieces of potential legislation across many of our states over the last year. Don't say gay bills, a lot of bills targeting transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary students. So, and curriculum also in opposition to an inclusive, expansive curriculum that includes all history. So I think a lot of teachers are feeling anxiety in about half of our states, especially. And I often feel that prior to, let's say, 2015, we had continued on an upward trajectory in my lifetime with a few bits of backsliding, but minimal, largely moving forward and moving upward, a more inclusive country in which we try to put everyone at the table and listen to all voices and give everyone an opportunity. And then we have experienced since 2015 some backsliding, in some cases really severe backsliding. So I think teachers in 2023 might not feel as free and open as teachers did in, this is 2023, let's say 2013. So we've had some backsliding. I hope we're able to put the brakes on that backsliding and then continue the move forward.
Yeah. Well, I see we've got a question in the chat, which relates to this. Did you have any students that came out to you after you did? They shared that their teacher and many of their students felt comfortable speaking with them. However, because of the bills here in Florida, it's not an atmosphere of making students more inclusive.
I don't recall that any student came out to me after that happened, but I did have a couple of students that I'd had a few years prior then come to me and talk about the fact that they actually were also LGBTQ and they hadn't mentioned it before. And now, 30 years hence, I'm friends through social media with a lot of my students from 1990 to 97 when I taught at that school. And there are LGBTQ individuals I'm friends with now who were my students in the 1990s. And they do talk about to me how that just was like a breath of fresh air or an open window to have an openly gay teacher. Recently, I did this panel with young college students, and I asked them how many had an openly LGBTQ teacher in K through 12. How many of you have such now in college? And sadly, and a bit surprisingly, I think of the 4 I asked it of, there were 3 that have had one openly LGBTQ teacher. And I just think it's really important that students do have openly LGBTQ teachers, because I think it gives them an opportunity to understand that this life can be just as wonderful, and that they can be just as well adjusted and happy as anyone else can be. And all the negative things that politicians are saying about them simply are not true. And that can be reflected in that teacher who's standing before them.
Thank you. Well, one of the participants says it sounds like Melville District is supportive of LGBTQIA today. What are your thoughts about the recent laws enacted in Missouri?
It was so refreshing when I went back to Melville High School for that filming. I hadn't been there, actually. I had not been in the school in 20 years when I went back and met some of these teachers again that I had worked with. And it was so overwhelmingly refreshing to see how that school district had changed, to see that they had this GSA group now, to see that they'd had a transgender student playing sports. And now here in Missouri, I think we had 35 to 40 potential pieces of legislation that were anti-LGBTQ. Thankfully, most of those did not make it through the legislative process, but half a dozen or so did. And right now in Missouri, in terms of transgender healthcare for young people, there's a lot of anxiety about it. There are areas in which you cannot get any sort of healthcare, that parents and their doctors and their children can't make decisions. In terms of transgender youth playing on the sports team for their gender identity, this is not allowed right now in Missouri. It's one of these types of pieces of legislation that was birthed in Florida and then has spread to other states. So I suspect there has been some backsliding at Melville High School, as there's been backsliding in probably just about every school in Missouri and in Florida and in probably a dozen other states.
Well, a kind of related question of what's happening in Missouri and all across the country, but kind of relating it back to that time in Melville. Did the national media attention make the situation at school, or what, I guess, how did the media attention affect what was happening in school? Did it make it more difficult, or were there actually some benefits?
I think largely it was beneficial, because the school district knew that if they didn't grant me my 5th-year contract after this happened in March, and if they didn't then grant me a tenured contract at the end of my 5th year, that people would know, that people were paying attention. They couldn't just do what they wanted to do and not think that there would be public awareness. So I think that made it beneficial. In some ways, it complicated things here and there occasionally, but largely it was beneficial. Also, having the Missouri NEA, the National Education Association, providing an attorney to me also helped secure my position. And there were other factors too involved in the reason in the end I was able to get a tenured contract. And it was so important to me that I not fail. It was so important to me that I succeed in that endeavor, because I knew that if they let me go, then every LGBTQ person in that district, be they an employee or a student, would go a little more deeply into a closet, because they were then seeing what happened to the person who decided to be open and honest. So I really felt a responsibility that I had to do everything I could to make sure that I kept my job. And then once I was granted the tenured contract, I taught my 6th year, I taught again my 7th year, and then it was just time for me to do something else. I moved to Massachusetts, have a new chapter in my life, but I wanted to get the contract and then teach 2 additional years, just to make sure that the message was clear that you can be openly gay, in my case, openly gay, and you can survive that process, and you can be an integrated and integral part of a school system.
That is a lot of weight to put on anyone's shoulders. Rodney, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, I was just thinking, I'm sure there were days that were, kind of good about, talking about people that were supportive and those that weren't. But I kept thinking, where did he draw his strength? I mean, I think you're talking about how important it was, but did you have like some people or what? On those bad days, I can't imagine that there weren't, like, besides just, I need to get this needs to work. What was your source of strength?
Well, I did have friends, of course. I had some friends in that school district who were LGBTQ, but not open about it. And they were largely supportive, though there was some trepidation among some of them, because this light, might also shine on them. I had friends from college that I was still in very close communication with, who were very supportive. My mother is a strong and determined woman who believes in doing what is right and true and protecting people who are being harmed. And I think I get from my mother some of that kind of tenacity or spirit, that I just have to say what it is I feel I have to say, and I have to keep pressing forward and walking through that circumstance. And as I said earlier, I think too, when you're 29, these things can be easier. I noticed when I watched the video here again with everyone, I'm sure if I had on a monitor, my blood pressure goes up a bit. I can see my breathing gets a little more shallow. So it causes a little bit of anxiety to watch it now. And I don't remember feeling that anxiety in 1994. I'm sure I had it from time to time, but sometimes when you're walking through something, you just go through it, and then you feel the anxiety in the aftermath.
Yeah. Well, and maybe just let's see. I want to check and see if we have questions, but do you ever have any sense of anxiety nowadays, or is it so different? It's been so long of, having found LGBT History Month, having gone through the experience of Melville. Is it easier? I don't know if that's the right word.
Well, for me, it is. Now there were periods again after Melville. For example, I taught in a county house of correction in Western Massachusetts for 5.5 years. I had my students were inmates there, ages 17 to 21. They hadn't finished high school by the time they found themselves there, and I worked on GED prep and things like that. And my students, I didn't talk about anything regarding my personal life, nor did others, because it was a situation that was very different. So there were times even after that when, okay, you got to kind of not talk about something. But I think also straight people weren't talking about their private lives, because in a correctional educational environment, you just have a different kind of circumstance. But yeah, I'm happy to say now I'm out at the job I'm at. I helped co-founded a GSA there at the college. Right now we have a display up, the diversity committee that I'm on. We have a display up in the concourse area of the college. We're going to be having a conversation on October 20 about LGBTQ History Month, calling it Lunch and Learn, with any employee at the college. So I think things are very different now in many ways. Although I do think, as I said, there's been some backsliding for K through 12 educators.
Yeah.
And that's been imposed upon them through political action.
Well, and this leads to an interesting question that we have from one of our participants is, I believe we need strong teacher unions and more people to vote and not be complacent. Do you think complacency amongst the nation is making it easier for legislation like Don't Say Gay to be passed?
Yes. Sometimes we tune out because we want to avoid the anxiety of the moment. I find myself not paying attention for a few days because I need the reprieve from what's going on. And I think that is what happened. There was a complacency that we were moving forward, and then our system was shocked. Our political system was shocked. We continue to work through that shock and the aftermath, and we don't know what's happening in the future. So yeah, we have to be aware. We have to stay informed. And absolutely, we have to vote. And when politicians are trying to do something that we disagree with, we have to let them know through a phone call, through testifying at a hearing, through a letter writing campaign, to a petition campaign. And I know it's hard to do all that stuff. I get so tired of it too. But if we stop paying attention, those who don't support LGBTQ rights and the rights of other people who are marginalized, they will continue to further marginalize all of those individuals because they're not looking out for the collective, everyone. They're looking out, in my view, for particular interest. So yeah, pay attention and vote.
Great answer. Well, we would definitely agree with that at AARP. So actually, I want to ask this question too. I had one more about the movement, but one of your students had stated in the video about how, or in the film about how you were a pioneer. Do you feel that way?
Well, you know, it's hard to sometimes accept those kinds of descriptors, but I guess in terms of a literal definition regarding LGBTQ education, history, and teachers, I did some work that could be called pioneering. I simply did what I had to do, what I felt compelled to do, what I felt was the right thing to do. But yeah, I guess that would be a word that would be an apt and correct description of what I did 30 years ago.
Well, the last question, we're close to time here, but wanted to know for all of our participants, what can you tell us about the movement today? Anything
Well,
that you would like to leave them with?
We have faced challenges in the last 6-7 years. Those challenges will continue. Generally, our community institutions have remained vigilant and engaged and strong, offering oppositional commentary all along the way. We've seen people marching and demonstrations and that sort of thing. I think our movement is in a period right now of learning as well. We're learning that in the past, we weren't conscious of the totality of the community, and we weren't as warm, welcoming, and inviting of everyone in the community as we should have been. And we're doing corrective work in that regard now. And I think we all want to, I think really, as I'm getting older, I'm thinking, you know, life is very short, and we all should do everything we can to increase happiness, increase satisfaction, increase joy for ourselves and for everybody who's, you know, within earshot, who can hear us and be part of our lives. So if we're doing something, and I wish politicians would think about this, if we're doing something that curtails happiness and joy and satisfaction and empathy and understanding and kindness, then let's back off from that and let's find things that we can do. And I think the LGBTQ community overwhelmingly engages in that process where we're trying to just increase the right of everyone to pursue happiness, as Jefferson put it.
That sounds like a great note to end on, and then we are at the end of top of our hour. But Rodney, it's been such a pleasure to get an opportunity to speak with you, and such an honor. And I think I agree with your student. I think you are a pioneer and an inspiration to all of us. So for our participants, if you enjoyed our conversation this evening, please join us again on Wednesday, October 18th, when we'll get a chance to speak with Professor Jason Flatt from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who will address equity in healthcare for the LGBTQ plus community. You can find a registration link in the chat right now, or by visiting our website, where you will find other workshops and ways to engage with AARP. You can also just simply go to your search engine and type in AARP Sacramento, and you'll find the listings there. And Rodney, again, just thank you so much for this important conversation as we begin really recognizing and celebrating LGBT History Month, and thinking about ways that all of us can get involved in, whether it's small or big ways, things that we can do to help advance the cause. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, AARP, and everyone who joined us.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.